Good evening. From Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and the Gail Lemron Auditorium, welcome to another in the Embry-Riddle Speaker Series events. I'm Mark Bernier, the moderator for tonight's event. Cybersecurity is one of the most popular subjects we've covered during the years we have done this series, and tonight we bring transportation into it. Three experts, two who are frequent visitors to this program from Embry-Riddle, and a special guest tonight. I'm going to introduce all three. We'll begin the discussion, then we'll take questions from the students and the general audience that's with us tonight. And then later, we'll tell you about an exciting program we have coming up in just a couple of weeks. I want to introduce our panel tonight. Dr. Philip Krager, who along with Dr. Gary Kessler, who's the chairman of his committee in the College of Arts and Sciences, and also joining us tonight for the first time, Jerry Hancock, who's the Director for Cyber Security for Aviation at Inmersat. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel for tonight on cybersecurity and transportation. Gary, what is Immersat?
Okay, fair question. So Inmersat is a global satellite communications corporation. So think of it as the AT&T globally. We specialize in maritime industry, aviation industry, all sorts of industries where satellites used. Okay,
I want to make sure everybody can hear this. If we can, yeah, okay. Can you bring it up a little bit upstairs? Thank you. Jerry, what led you to come into this? Were you always interested in aviation as a youth? How did you come into this?
Yeah, so for me, aviation's always been a passion. That and trying to be as geeky as possible growing up. Like we were talking earlier, how many computers did I break when I was growing up trying to figure out, how am I going to make this work? But between that and aviation, those are my two passions. I love flying. I have my pilot's license and stuff like that, so I love doing that. And I just love the technology that's involved in doing this. It's treated me well over the past, 20, 30 years.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Gary Kessler, you've worked in the private sector and worked in higher education for a number of years, chairman of your department. Let's talk a little bit about, because background, we have people, some of our visiting us for the first time. What got you into this field?
The cybersecurity field?
Yes.
I just want to make sure. Actually, Jerry and I were discussing this earlier. My background academically is in math and computer science. I took my first computer programming class in 1973. First accidentally broke a mainframe in 1974, which I totally chalk up to bad programming. And first purposely broke into a mainframe in 1976, which I chalk up to being clever. And I've been involved in information security one way or another formally since the late 1970s. We didn't call it cybersecurity then. It was all about protecting information. And so one plug I'll throw out now is, I actually don't love the term cybersecurity because I think it makes it too narrow of a focus, that we focus on the cyber elements. And really what we're trying to do is we're protecting computers, we're protecting networks. For the bottom line is really what we're trying to do is protect the information. And now, of course, we're getting away from cybersecurity. Now we're talking about cyber defense, because it's not just securing the border, if you will, but it's defending from active attacks. And so that's in a nutshell sort of how I
Dr. Krager, before coming to Embry-Riddle, you were at Daytona State College across the street.
And a couple more universities before that.
And what got you into cybersecurity?
Well, I'll start where I got into computers. I was working on my PhD in industrial psychology in 1987, and I was going through and I thought, well, yeah, this is okay. It wasn't exactly what I expected. And then I had to start using computers, and I realized those are a lot of fun. There's a lot of ways you can manipulate those. And so human beings have always made me uncomfortable, but computers have made me comfortable. And so I kind of segued into the computer realm, and I got a minor in artificial intelligence. And then about 10 years later, I started getting into cybersecurity, cyber forensics, things of that nature, and continued.
I hope you really enjoy these guys because they bring an interesting perspective. For example, Jerry, I think a lot of people came to tonight's event thinking, we're going to hear what is the threat of another plane crashing into a building. But the biggest threat, apparently, to aviation may not be what you think. It could be the theft of information through cybersecurity breaches. Tell the audience about what you shared with us before the program. Credit cards, things like that.
So yeah, so you have to remember that from an aviation perspective, and most of your transportation stuff, it's an ecosystem, right? And so with aviation specifically, there's different parts. There's parts that are ran by the government that are really focused on information about the aircraft, how to control it, how to monitor it, and all that other stuff. But the people that actually fly it, like a United or a Lufthansa or something like that, their missions are a little bit different. Yeah, they're in the business of flying the planes, but they're also in the business of making sure that they manage their operating environment as well. So one of the things that in the past you'll hear about what are concerns from an airline perspective is how many frequent flyer miles are stolen. Where IDs are compromised, where you log into websites, and I don't know, everybody loves going in, logging into your frequent flyer miles, and nope, your password's not strong enough, we got to change it, all that other stuff. It's a pain, but to the airlines, it's a revenue loss. If people are stealing those miles, then that's money out of their pocket.
So do people often log in and find out their miles are gone?
It's happened. I don't know the volume or statistics on it, but it's one of the things that they're very concerned about their operating environment, how to protect their websites in general, right? The systems are involved with doing that. Like when you go to the airport, the kiosks and stuff like that, they want to make sure that that entire environment is secure, right? And that's just one part of the ecosystem. You've got the airport authorities themselves that are doing stuff to make sure that it's not just the passengers getting to the different terminals and stuff like that, but it's all the electronics they use to manage and operate the airport, fuel trucks, catering trucks, and so on and so forth, in addition to the airplanes that are sitting there waiting for passengers to come on board and take off to the next destination.
Let me do interplay. How many in our audience use the kiosk to check in at the airport? Okay. It's about half. They're trying to push everybody to do kiosks, correct?
Sure. It's very convenient. It saves on labor costs.
Or
like
online.
That. Or online, yeah, actually.
Totally obviating the kiosking.
Right.
Actually, I just use the app, quite frankly. It works out much better once I'm checking a bag. But, these are important things. If you go to statistics, there was a thing last year where there was a hacker who took over the transportation, I think it was like in San Francisco or something like that, where they actually ransomware the kiosk for the local transportation system. And I, again, can't remember where it was, but I'd written a paper on part of it last year.
Was that the BART one?
Yeah, it's out in San Francisco, right? And so that had a huge monetary impact to that particular industry, right? It had nothing to do with the safety of the train or the passengers, which is what people mainly focus on in the transportation industry, especially within aviation, right, is what's the safety impacts. But you also have to look at the monetary impacts of things as well. So,
you are a person who spends a lot of time above and below the water.
This is true.
What can you tell us about breaches with maritime? Is that a big deal right now, or is it becoming a big deal?
I think it is, in maritime, it's as big a deal, I would dare say, as in aviation, but differently. One of the points that Jerry made is that aviation's an ecosystem. Well, so is maritime. So in aviation, I've got the airline. So I've got the passenger lines and the cargo lines in maritime. I have airports. In maritime, I've got a port. I've got the aircraft. I've got the ships. Not to mention everybody's got a website. And if you look at railroads, primarily not exactly the same, but you've got the same thing. In terms of I've got the railroad lines, I've got the railroads themselves, I have the stations and all those kind of things. And so the difficulty in securing or even discussing all of this is the fact that all of those things interplay with each other. You can't secure 91,000 merchant marine vessels easily, and even if you secure all of the vessels, well, what about the thousands of ports that we have to deal with? And the fact that every a cruise line and every cargo line has their own systems as well. You were talking about the hack in San Francisco. Well, there was this hack last summer, a big one. There were many, but one particular big one that made the news was at the Port of Long Beach. The Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach, I believe 1/3 of all U.S. imports by ship come into those two ports. So you take one of those ports down and the ships stop moving, well, again, imagine the impact. At an airport, if I can bring down the passport control system at an international airport, all of a sudden people can't move. They can't come in from one flight and go out on another. Planes don't move. The cost of that can be incredible. At cargo ports, there's some estimate at some ports that a ship delay getting to a port costs $80,000 or $81,000. I don't know why I'm quibbling over the thousand at that point. $80,000 an hour. Again, that talks about now real money as when these inefficiencies, hit the systems, and we're trying to build more cyber to make all these systems more and more efficient. So at this point, I think it's possible that I forget exactly what your first question was, but I know it had something to do with
latest in maritime.
Yeah,
And I want to, before you continue, can we make it just a little bit louder up there? I'm afraid that some of our folks are losing this, but the question was maritime.
Yeah. So, maritime is having the same issues that cyber does, or that aviation does. People are hacking into the websites. There's all sorts of fraud within the maritime industry for a whole bunch of reasons. And not passenger fraud. It's generally companies that are selling cargo or selling fuel are being defrauded within the industry the same way everybody else is. Phishing attacks, spam attacks, those kind of things. We still have issues with people breaking into websites, getting personal information, particularly on passenger lines. We have issues with hacks on navigation, and I'm sure sometime we'll come up today. We'll talk a little bit more about GPS and the issues with spoofing GPS. So I have ships not being where they think they are. We're finding ways that it's easier for pirates to, let's say, hack into a web server, find out what cargo is on a particular vessel, where is that vessel, go to that vessel, and once on the vessel, they know exactly what cargo container they want and what contents they're going to find. So rather than occupy a vessel for days at a time, which gives an opportunity for there to be a response to the piracy, they're on and off the vessel in a matter of hours. Very, very difficult to launch a response in those cases. So again, all the things that we might find with a slightly different ramification in the different segments of transportation, all are hitting maritime as well.
Gary, has that actually happened where, like, I'm thinking the Somali pirates just said, we're going to take that piece of crate right now because it has gold in it or something?
There have been incidents of that. There have been incidents where bad guys are shipping contraband in legitimate cargo containers, which would make sense, and hacking into the Customs Bureau. This actually happened quite famously in Australia. They hacked into the Customs Bureau, and any cargo container that had their contraband that was flagged for further inspection, they just abandoned.
Wow.
Because they knew that the cops were looking for them. There have been false bills of lading, and rerouting of cargo to a different port, so that by the time the owner of a cargo bin knows that it's missing, the bad guys have already picked it up from the port where it was actually delivered. I mean, I'm not giving career advice, nor am I even imagining this. This is all stuff that's been in the news.
And to bring Phil into this, drone usage. And of course, it's big right now because center discussion is the securing of the southern border with Mexico. Some are saying that we might be able to do much of it through the use of drones.
Right.
What do you think? Can we do a lot more with drones than we can by putting a wall up?
All of a sudden, it became a political question.
Yeah, and
right?
usually he gives those to me.
So just the way I look at it, I'm always in the middle. So I see that there's probably going to be some use for a wall, but I think that drones and human intelligence is going to be a big factor in stopping a lot of the things that are crossing the border. With regard to drones and cybersecurity, you just have to remember, if you look at the components of a drone, it's essentially a flying computer, right? And because it's a computer, that means that it works just like our laptops and our desktops and our cell phones. And we know that on a daily basis is that somebody's going to find a vulnerability in a computer. And the same thing is with drones, because I'm doing a lot of drone research right now with these, they're called small unmanned aerial systems. And what we're finding is they're full of vulnerabilities, including the ability to knock them out of the air, and including the ability of taking them over and actually, commanding them to do what you want them to do. And there's actually been instances of researchers going out and taking control of a Department of Homeland Security drone that was reconnoitering over the border, and the Department of Homeland Security didn't want to hear about it until the researchers, I think it was Texas A&M, went to them and demonstrated this and say, we actually control that, and then they became interested.
Wow. Scary. I mean, there's fighting over drone usage because there are concerns about interfering with aircraft coming in. It's tough enough, they got to deal with birds, let alone deal with drones. Do you think that they'll overcome that? I mean, our neighbors are the airport.
There's two aspects to that. One of which is that you own a drone and somebody wants to take control of your drone for whatever purpose. The other is something called anti-drone technology, and that is you've got a malicious actor out there flying a drone in no-fly airspace, and somebody needs to take control of that drone or shoot that drone down or just get it out of the airspace. And so there's actually technology out there, including things like shooting a net out to take control of the drone. There's cyber ways of taking control of the drone. And there's actually the good old-fashioned shotgun approach, which actually, by the way, is illegal. You shouldn't do that.
Don't do that.
Shooting them out of the air is illegal.
No, yeah.
Well, you know why? We've had people here say, well, if it was over my property, I'd just shoot it.
No, don't do that.
Yeah,
you
don't
can
do that.
send in a hawk or an eagle after it.
That was my last thing.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Is that in Europe, they're training birds of prey to go and attack the drones. And so there's, if you go into YouTube, you'll
Sorry,
see,
really?
yeah, birds of prey and drones, and you'll see this drone flying, and this bird of prey comes up and snatches it out of the air. That's really good for the smaller drones. Or the larger drones, that would probably be a really big impact into this. And it's really important because these malicious actors that are flying drones around the airport, somebody just did a study showing the difference between a small 8-pound drone hitting the fuselage or the wing and a bird, and by far the most damage was caused by the drone. And these drones are very small.
Do they make drones now so that they can defend themselves if they're attacked? With, shooting darts, shooting poison, anything like that. I'm just wondering if we've become that sophisticated.
There's actually some technology that's being pushed by both the United States government, including the Air Force and the Navy, as well as the Chinese government, and they're called drone swarms. And so drone swarms means you have anywhere from 40 to 100 to 1,000 different drones that are working autonomously, and they're not being controlled manually, they're being controlled by talking to each other. And so if one drone falls out, the drone swarm understands that, and they here. If you saw the Super Bowl a few years ago with Lady Gaga, and you saw that wonderful thing in the sky and you didn't know what those lights were, that was a drone swarm.
Oh, wow. I may never go in my backyard again. There's so many different areas where cybersecurity comes into, which is why transportation and cybersecurity became our focus for tonight. I want to come back to aviation as it relates from Phil's comments on drones. Do you think as we get further down the path, we're going to see more drones and less actual airplanes flying in matters of combat, matters of trying to secure an area?
I don't know that I can quantify any one of those, but what I will say is this, is that drones is a big industry, right? Both commercially and in the government. And actually, there was just an article published not too long ago where Boeing has a drone that they've created for the military to be the wingman for a primary pilot, right? You're always going to have pilots, right? And you're always going to have those things there. It's just a matter of how do you complement that with a drone, in our past environment. And that's really the challenge these days is you've got, some people call it disruptors, for lack of a better term, where people are using it for unintentional use, malicious intent, whatever the case is. But the reality is there are benefits and there are different places where it makes sense. It's just how do you control the people who don't want to, follow those same rules? And more importantly, how do you integrate this into the air traffic management system to make sure it doesn't cause any safety issues? And I know, having worked for the government in the past, that was one of the biggest issues and continues being one of the biggest issues is how do you take these environments and integrate it with air traffic control where it can be effectively managed and operated in a safe way? And that's really the challenge these days. I think you're going to find it's the right tool for the job. That's really what it comes down to. There are things where it absolutely makes sense, where drones can provide a lot of benefit. If it's done effectively and correctly, but it also at the same time too, you're going to have pilots continue to do what they need to do.
We covered a topic on radio and discussed in one of these forums about the fact that Walmart is going to be hiring truck drivers at a rate of about $90,000 a year. But at the same time, we're hearing from CBS that within 6 to 7 years, there'll be layoffs of truck drivers because of driverless vehicles. Yeah. How susceptible, gentlemen, will those driverless vehicles be to a cyber attack? that simply takes over and directs them into another area.
Well,
Yeah, to me, that's the command and control piece of this. That's the biggest issue with the drone environment is how do you protect the command and control where it will keep things safe, right? So one of the conversations that I had recently is there is a forum called JARIS. JARIS is focused on joint international collaboration for standards for UAS. And the whole thing, when you start to look at their safety standards of what they're putting together, it's focused on multiple different areas, not just the drone itself, but command and control is the biggest thing. And how do you put it in an environment where some people believe I've got RF signals, so I can always have line of sight. They don't think about how jamming can impact that. If they're using LTE and they want to go beyond line of sight, LTE isn't everywhere. Despite what AT&T, Verizon, everybody else says, there are gaps in the networks. So what are you going to do to make sure that when you are out of control or that's out of your zone, where the standards are, what's the technology you're going to implement to make sure it's there? And so it really comes down to, most people that I've talked to, it really comes down to following almost the same standards that they do for aviation today, which is you have a primary and you have a backup. They must both be functional. They must both work, and they have to be complementary systems, not two of the same systems, but complementary systems where if your primary fails, your backup will take up that slack and allow you to still maintain positive control over your environment.
Additional viewpoints, Gary?
Well, I think the whole thing about autonomous vehicles in all the realms. You're talking about aviation, we've got drones, Amazon, of course, also wants to deliver things by autonomous drone. I heard a presentation last year, they were talking about someone was doing some work with autonomous planes landing on aircraft carriers. Now, aircraft carriers are notoriously hard to land on because it's like they're moving. And so they had this drone going through a number of trials. And they found that one of the problems was the drone was so perfect in its landing, it was the hook was causing a rut at the edge of the runway. They actually had to build air into it so that the drone would occasionally move a foot or two to the side so it wouldn't damage the runway it was landing on the aircraft carrier. But we see this autonomous ships. People want to build autonomous ships right now that literally will have no place for a human. There's no human quarters. And we're talking about this, of course, you mentioned trucks already, we're talking about it with cars. I have no doubt that the technology is there that would allow us successfully to build a truck that I can put on, exit 362 here at I-95 and at ISB and have it run down to Miami Beach and run the freeway and navigate it just fine. Because there's a finite number of things that can happen on a freeway. When you get into surface streets, I'm not so convinced. Same thing, you can build a ship that way. And I'm reminded that in the early 90s, I heard a talk by some business guy, I wish I could remember his name, but he was talking about future automation of factories. And he said, in the future, factories will be staffed by two living beings, a man and a dog. The purpose of the man will be to feed the dog. The purpose of the dog will be to keep the man from touching anything. And we're getting there. But like I said, when Rolls-Royce has already designed, I think they're one of two, that have already designed autonomous cargo vessels for the open seas that literally, like I said, they have no place for crew quarters. They're going to do everything either remotely or they're going to do it autonomously. And again, the technology is there. I've got no problem with the technology, but the technology has not necessarily been built to withstand the attack of an intelligent actor who wants to do something bad. And every talk I've heard about autonomous ships, they don't mention cyber. Amazon, the couple of talks I've heard, when they talk about their drones, they have a wonderful system, and it's great. It's going to work, but they don't mention cyber either. And so, I think that's the issue, is that we're not necessarily building our systems to deal with bad actors.
Bill, want to add to that?
I'm just thinking of the potential threat vectors for an autonomous vehicle, especially when we were talking about the autonomous trucks. And I'm guessing that they work they're required to have GPS to know where they are and what they're doing, and it's quite easy to jam certain types of GPS. That's against the law, but it's not that difficult to do. I think there's still a lot of potential threats that need to be thought through before that's going to be a reality. I mean, you could imagine looking next to you, if any of you drive I-95 and see all the trucks out there, now imagine that half of them were autonomous. There was nobody in the cab. It'd be very scary.
Indeed.
Less scary than people looking down texting.
Yeah.
But your point is noted.
Yes.
All right, in the audience, how many people have bought a new car in the last 18 months? Raise your hand. Okay, there's a few. Do any of these people have reason to be concerned that their cars could be taken over through a cyber breach because of all the new features in the car? I mean, we're seeing cars advertised on television that if a child runs in front of it chasing a ball, the car stops. Are any of the folks that bought these new vehicles, are they susceptible to a cyber breach?
I haven't heard anything recently about cyber breaches, but there's something from a few years ago with the Jeeps.
Yeah, DOD was doing some work.
No, this wasn't the DOD. This was a couple of researchers. So they had somebody, a journalist, driving a Jeep down the road, and they were able to connect into the Jeep over, I guess it was LTE, and because they have to be connected, and they were able to turn off the vehicle, turn on the air conditioning, turn it off, turn on the music, pretty much control the entire thing from a distance of 10 miles. That was a few years ago. We haven't heard a lot about that up till then, but just the very fact that that vehicle was on the road and that was capable should be cause for concerns, because we need to be proactive and not just saying, okay, it's something Jerry was talking about before, the vehicle is safe, but in terms of bringing in the cyber, is that you need to make sure you understand the threats and being able to accommodate that. And right now, I don't think that we're doing it.
To the audience, how many of you have been on a cruise in the last 3 years? Anyone? Wow, okay. Could cruise ships be under cyber attack like any other vessel?
There are certainly ways in which, I want to word this carefully. I don't think the cruise ships are being taken over cyberly, if that's a word. But certainly there are a lot of systems on any ship, either a cruise ship or a cargo ship, that certainly can be accessed via the network or via a network. Oddly enough, I mean, we've got Jerry here working for Inmersat. I mean, the ships are widely using international satellites. They all have an internet connection. They generally don't have multiple internet connections, which means that eventually all of the networks on vessels, unless they are architected very, very well, all of the networks ultimately come together at least one point, the point where they all go to the internet. And so again, there have been any number of attacks where, and these have been demonstrated, where I can cause a virus onto the master's computer, the captain's computer, and from there, updates, normal software updates, can ripple out to the rest of the networked systems on the ship, and they now carry the virus across. There are ways of attacking the radar systems. There are ways of attacking communication systems, the nav systems, the bridge systems. And again, all this stuff has been demonstrated on real vessels. I don't know that there's been, well, I've not read about any specific attacks on ships themselves, except for about 1.5 years ago, where there was a giant GPS spoofing attack, where 19 vessels in the Black Sea all thought they were 30 kilometers from the water, and they were in the middle of a runway of an airport. And they thought that they were all within 100 meters of another 18 ships. Now, the captains were no fools. They went out on the bridge, they looked around, and they said, yep, I'm surrounded by water. And I don't see another ship within 100 meters. So they knew the instrumentation was wrong. But the fact is, if you're driving at night and your only navigational tool is your GPS, obviously this is a problem. However, you were talking about cars. You had a really good Tesla story.
Yeah. Yeah. So our conversation earlier was, what do we think the most vulnerable cars could be? So the reality is, any of the new cars today, and I know this, having worked with different people in the automotive industry, they take a lot of care into making sure that your updates are done, right? But when you buy your car, your updates were done when you bought your car. If you want to do updates later, you have to go to the dealer and pay them to do any updates that are there. The Tesla model obviously is a lot different, and a friend of mine, or a guy they know who has a Tesla, his thing is Tesla doesn't give you an option. When they have Wi-Fi access, they do an update to the car to make sure it has the latest patches and updates that are required for the system. And I think fundamentally, that's the thing that everybody needs to understand. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. Cyber hygiene is the best way to be able to mitigate against attacks, is to make sure that you update, do your patches, you've got your virus software on there and all that other stuff to be able to detect this. And with something like Tesla, I like their model, it forces the car to do the update to make sure it's done.
And I want to hold on that because what he was saying was cyber hygiene. Think about that. I mean, how many people have computers and never get their updates, or they put it off? Tesla takes control. When they're ready, they give you the updates.
System. It's part of the way the system works. Is it goes out and does these updates, and it does it on its own. It doesn't.
So how difficult would it be for somebody to spoof Tesla and download an update to your car?
Got no idea. But the reality is, I think it's easier if I just take somebody like I have a Chevy. I like my Chevy.
Yeah.
But I also know too that Bluetooth is vulnerable. That's on most any car.
How vulnerable to what?
It has different parts of the system, right? But it's not. I can tell you, there's been a guy who, connected his Bluetooth headset to my car, and I didn't even register it. Right?
Yeah.
It's these things happen. You have to put some of this in perspective, right? So like on an aircraft, we have certain buses within the aircraft that only do certain things, and you can't cross over, right? It's just physically impossible. Unless somebody makes a physical change, it's impossible to do that. Cars are the same way. They have buses internal to them, just like ships do. Certain things are in certain parts of the ship or certain levels of the ship that are there for a reason. Is the manufacturers try to include some aspect of cyber or protections, right? A lot of them are forced because of safety that are being done, but it's, to me, a lot of it's just basic hygiene and making sure that your systems are well protected and you keep them updated. If you don't, this is where you get into, oh wow, my website was hacked and it's because of a vulnerability from 9 years ago that we just forgot about. And that happens often.
I want to make sure the audience who is following all this is not like panicking. If anybody bought a Chevy or a Ford or a Toyota or a Honda, are they going to have updates that they need to have their dealer make for them?
No, their business models are pretty solid, right?
Okay.
I mean, like I said, I'm not in a rush to go take my car down to go get it patched and updated. It's a solid thing.
Yeah, and when you go in for servicing, there's a necessary patch. Presumably, they do it at that time.
Yeah, so I mean, cars are built safe just like airplanes are built safe, trains or whatever the case is. It's just a matter of, people maintaining them and keeping them correctly.
I think that one of the important lessons out of this is cars are basically rolling networks. And I don't know how many computers are in cars, but you're talking about dozens. You've got sensors all over the place. You've got a computer now probably in every wheel. You've got all sorts of computers monitoring, fuel injection. Gone are the days when I could actually tune my own engine and, gap the points on the carburetor. Now there's a skill that I'm sure is long gone.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. Do they even have points? I'm pretty sure they still have a carburetor. Yeah. But so oh, damn. Well, see, I have not been keeping track of these things, not since the mid-'70s.
Medical records we discussed, it's a little outside of this area, but could it be used against, I wonder about hospitals being hacked into that information, which is very sensitive, pharmaceutical companies, pharmacies.
Right.
Gentlemen, in general, I know it's outside of our area of expertise tonight, but how vulnerable do you think hospitals and pharmacies are to cyber attack?
A lot.
Really?
From my perspective, I know there's standards that they're supposed to implement, but like anything else, it just comes down to cyber hygiene.
Right.
If you look at HIPAA, things like GDPR, things that are policy and regulation that are put in place to govern those types of things. The rules and policies are there. It really comes down to the entities themselves being responsible to implement what has to get done. And a lot of times it comes down to a business decision. And it doesn't matter what the industry is, whether it's aviation, or if it's somebody like a hospital or something like that. You've got to pay your IT staff. You've got to make sure that your systems are updated and patched on time, and that you enforce it. Because the worst person at a company is insiders, and it's because wow, I've got to change my password again. Okay, fine, let me write it on the sticky, and I've got a whole sled of stickies of my passwords and stuff like that. That still happens. Trust me, I see it. And it comes down to a while. You've got your trash guy that nobody ever spends any time with, and attacks today aren't always about disruption. In most cases, most attacks are about gaining information, gaining control.
Without even having a sophisticated device to do it.
Not necessarily.
A lot of times it's not, right? So
I get a newsletter every day that usually has about 18 or so little snippets of articles about various things related to cyber. 2 or 3 are always about healthcare, and there's another 2 or 3 always about finance. Healthcare and the financial industry, I would gather today, or guess today, are the 2 biggest targets. And a lot of it has to do with lack of user training, because that's the other big thing we need to do. But today in healthcare, they were talking about insecure use of laptops. And, it's just, like I said, and Jerry said this as well, and Phil has said this, it's a matter not only of keeping your software up to date, but keeping your users up to date as well. A couple of years ago when we had the WannaCry ransomware that went around and hit like 80% of the computers in the national healthcare system in the UK, because they were basically attacking Windows XP systems. And one wonders why in 2017 there's still all these Windows XP systems. Well, it's not because the UK healthcare system people are stupid. It's not even that they're cheap. Windows XP, came to its end of life in 2014. The problem is that the healthcare system was running apps that required Windows XP. And if you upgraded to another operating system like Windows 7, the apps no longer worked. So here you had the situation where they couldn't upgrade because if they upgrade, their system breaks. We're dealing with systems. We talked about this with aviation, to a certain degree with cars, to a certain degree with trains, to a big degree with maritime, where I'm designing a system today, and I have today's technology and today's chip. By the time I actually implement the technology, it's a couple, 3 years down the line, and I'm trying to make a 10 or 20 or 30-year investment. So you can imagine that we're looking at a ship or a plane in 2019 that was built in 1995. Think about the technology it's got. And so we have other issues. Sometimes there's a vulnerability that we did nothing about for the last 10 years. Sometimes there's a vulnerability nobody knew about until today. And they discovered, oh crap, there's this vulnerability in SSL that nobody's known about for the last 10 years. And we just discovered it today. So now we have to fix it.
yeah, so I can tell you, at least from an industry perspective, from an aviation perspective, which is where I spend most of my time, we spend a lot of time with the manufacturers, whether it's on satellite terminals, whether it's with the aircraft and stuff like that. And there's a lot of effort, a lot of time that goes into making sure that we plan this correctly. Because quite frankly, even if we put in the coolest whiz-bang technology today, that's great, but somebody's got to pay for it. And they're building planes for a reason, somebody's buying them. But if the people buying them don't want that technology, or they don't understand it, then they're not going to buy it. So part of this is making sure as an industry, you grow it in a way that can be absorbed, both from a manufacturer and the people that are buying it, and the technology that's there, and they understand it, and they change as technology changes. And that's probably the biggest thing in aviation today is technology is changing, right? And so you've got to change with it, both the aircraft avionics in itself, where the pilots are sitting, to the people like the FAA who are, command and control, giving the pilot directions, maintaining airspace and all that other stuff. These systems have to change from an end-to-end perspective to be effective and be able to overlay how that impacts the people who are actually buying the planes and stuff like that. So it can be absorbed in a way that makes sense.
How many of you have ridden a train in the last year? Wow, that's actually more than I thought in the audience. Okay, how vulnerable are trains? We know the train tracks are iffy, but what about cyber hacks on trains?
You're smiling, so I'm referring to you.
Yeah, first of all, trains are very uncomfortable. For somebody 6'5".
I like trains personally.
Yeah, I guess it's a personal thing.
Yeah.
Trains are also vulnerable for a number of reasons, one of which is they're safety certified, classified. which means that all of the systems on the train have to go through certifications, okay? And so they're tested, they're certified, and then they're pushed out. And then all the trains are supposedly safe. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they're secure. And so if a malicious actor were able to find a vulnerability in one of the systems on a train, you can't just go say, okay, we're going to replace that technology. Because any new system is going to have to go back through recertification. And so that's going to take a long time, which means that systems that are safety classified are going to be a big target for malicious actors. Trains are becoming more and more automated and more technologically sophisticated, especially in Europe. Just having a conversation with one of my friends, Professor Jens Pols. Europe has gotten very good about looking at the cybersecurity hygiene of trains. They have a commission called the UIC, which has actually looked at a vulnerability assessment of the railways and come up with mitigation strategies. We don't have anything like that in the United States, and it's something that's sorely needed.
And I'll pile on that as well. From an aviation perspective, we actually talked about this very same thing earlier today, is Europeans are actually, I hate to say this, but they're actually quite a bit ahead than the FAA, or not the FAA, but just the U.S. in general when it comes to regulation from a safety perspective for cyber, right? That's one of the things that I know we're trying to work with from both a U.S. and a European agency perspective to take and have that public-private partnership to focus on what are the actual standards that we need to focus on, and we call it cyber safety. That's a term that we started using here quite a bit because it's where, the government's really good at focusing on safety and what are the issues associated with safety. But a lot of times, historically, they've not really looked at cyber being an attribute that has an impact to the safety. Whereas now we're saying, no, we need to look at that. We need to look at how cyber can impact safety directly or indirectly where it's appropriate, and then develop the appropriate mitigations for that. And it's not just for the object itself, so whether it's a train or aircraft, but it's also the things that feed those. So from the ground systems to the communication systems and everything else. And that's probably one of our biggest challenges is getting past that hurdle to really focus on that cyber safety aspect of things. And it's appropriate no matter the industry.
Just having another private sector launch of a rocket made me wonder to bring into this conversation. Now that we have the private sector setting rockets up and it's not NASA anymore, could they be more susceptible to bad actors trying to take control of rockets? Or is it no more dangerous than when NASA was running the show? What do you think, guys?
Oh, first of all, I'm not a rocket scientist.
Last I checked.
You had to slip that in.
So how many computer parts does one of these rockets have? I'm sure quite a few. Where do these chips come from? Now, let's say they've tested these chips. These chips are certified to do A, B, and C. Got it. Can they also do D, E, and F? What I'm saying is there's something called cyber supply chain security, which means that when you're putting together these complicated systems of hundreds, thousands of parts, has somebody certified these parts? Do they know exactly what they do? Could you slip in one that does something that it's not supposed to do? This is one of the things that the National Institutes of Standards and Technology is looking at, is trying to come up with a way of providing guidelines on cyber supply chain, because everything now is becoming more and more dependent upon computers and networks, and we don't know what these chips will do.
Well, I'll give a specific example. About 20 years ago, Dell bought a whole bunch of keyboards from a large Asian country. 5 letters, begins with C. And what happened was, they came up with the blueprints and said, here's a keyboard. So build us a keyboard. So they get the keyboards, and they tested the keyboards, functionally testing. Press A appears on the screen, these keyboards are good. Nobody ever looked at the blueprints of the keyboard that they had purchased, because what had been added was a circuit that basically was just a keystroke lugger, buffered everything. when the computer got onto a network, and by the late 90s, every computer was getting onto a network, it would occasionally, send back to cosmic headquarters, just, here's everything in the buffer. Now, nobody really wanted to know when you were typing your love letter to your spouse or significant other. What they wanted to know is when you typed in a username followed by what looked like a password. So you get a URL, Gary Kessler, banana. Well, they're going to probably figure out, here's the URL, here's a username, there's a password, and they get in people's creds.
Yeah.
And that was just a keyboard. That's not even a complex device. I can look at the well, I can't, but somebody can look at the blueprint and figure out that's not a circuit that belongs there. Now you take a chip with tens or hundreds of thousands of transistors on them. Nobody can look at that and see that there's some, extraneous circuit on there.
I'm trying to think the only mobile thing we hadn't covered yet, and we're going to take questions from the audience. So come right down. Students, line up. We're going to take your questions left to right for our panel. So come on down. Buses. Are buses any more vulnerable than driverless vehicles, trucks?
You mean like mass transit kind of buses?
Mass transit.
I've only ridden buses in London, and they're pretty solid.
They're pretty good.
There's a guy driving it. There's not.
Yeah,
There's not
they're not going with
They
driverless.
can't even get on without paying.
Yeah, but it really comes down to the same issues with when I talk about airline operators, right? That part of the ecosystem, they're concerned with how many people are scanning the Oyster card or the the transit card that they have there, scanning your cards and stuff like that. So you got to remember, you have to really look at it, and when you start to look at cyber safety, you have to separate things that are financial versus things that have an impact to safety, because it is very different, and it's just a different part of the ecosystem you have to focus on.
There was one more quick thing I wanted to slip in, because you mentioned this and it reminded me. There was some report a couple weeks ago about cameras in the entertainment systems in planes. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the airlines are saying, well, yeah, we've disabled the camera. So first of all, great.
Yeah, I read this article.
You better have your black electrical tape.
Yeah, well, I want to know how you disabled it. Did you actually pull the piece of fiber, or did you just check a box saying, don't work? Ostensibly, the camera is there because the manufacturer decided at some point in the future, particularly in first class on some airlines, people are going to want a video conference on the plane. Oh. So that'll just make it even more annoying to be up in first class. But be that as it may.
It's kind of like the camera, I'm sure that's probably on your computer, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I don't see the black tape, but that's okay. Nor the green light.
Have tape.
But I mean, you hear all the time about airlines. Well, I don't know that I've heard about this recently, but you hear about airlines or other things actually eavesdropping on their passengers.
Lovely.
Yeah, we haven't heard about any great stories like that for a while, but the point is, we're having all this technology sitting there that we as consumers don't even know is there.
Oh boy.
And
Phil, and then we'll go to the other.
Okay. So just related to what we're talking about with supply chain, is that anybody have a Google Nest, the thermostat? That it's an Internet of Things device, and you put it up, and it's a thermostat, and you connect it to your network at home, and then you can control it. You can turn up the heat or the air conditioner while you're away from the house. And so recently, Google came out, which is actually, it was bought by Google. They came out with a press release that said, hey, we're giving you new functionality. We're going to turn on the microphone in your Google Nest. The Google Nest has
that was your answer.
The Google Nest has a microphone in it.
Who knew?
And it was not in the specifications when you look at it, or when you purchased it, you said, okay, here's all the things that we'll do. Never did it say that it contained a microphone, and sometime later we'll turn that on for you. So now you can just speak directly to the Google Nest. And now you're thinking, have they been listening to me? And that's a microphone in a Google Nest device would be fairly obvious, you would think, but then you start thinking, knowing Google and how they kind of collect information on us, how long have they been collecting information using that device? I'm not saying that they did, but...
That'd be Siri and Alexa and your LG TV.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're already giving that information away anyway.
Let's come right down here, if you would. Speak right into the microphone. Give us your first name, your year of study here at Embry-Riddle, and your question for our panel.
Hello, my name's Olivia Fowler, and I'm a senior here at Embry-Riddle. I was hoping you guys could talk more about pilotless aircraft and the cybersecurity concerns that may result of that.
Pilotless aircraft.
How pilotless?
Cybersecurity.
Totally autonomous or remote control?
Both, actually. Specifically commercial aviation, so passenger aircraft.
Yeah, so there's a lot of work being done on that from a commercial perspective, and it goes back to one of the statements that I said earlier is the biggest thing around that is how to maintain safety of the aircraft and control, and how to integrate that into your air traffic management system. Those are the main challenges. From a security perspective, everybody's very concerned about that, but it's a matter of how you take the right electronics to secure it, along with the ground system, and being able to still have the drone fly, because right now a lot of those electronics aren't that small. And so what a lot of people are doing today is they're using what's commercially available to show functionality, and then trying to bolt security on top. And so that's what we're trying to wrestle with now, I think, as an industry, is how to integrate security more into the build, including the supply chain aspect of things, into something that becomes functional and usable.
A different way I could phrase my question is, do you think that there is actually a viable way that we can create a safe enough aircraft that it would be publicly accepted that does not have a pilot?
I believe so, yes. Yeah. I mean, they do that today. I mean, the military flies drones worldwide, right? And there's other commercial entities that are doing stuff as well, and they're working on it.
But
so
do
I
they
think you're
carry
gonna find-
passengers? I think that was your question,
Oh,
right?
is this for passengers?
Yeah,
Right,
passenger
I'm talking about
aircraft without a
specifically
pilot.
passenger commercial aircraft that we all fly on a regular basis.
Yeah, that
Is
one
there
I don't
a way
think
to
so.
make those
Yeah.
secure enough that they would be publicly accepted?
I don't think it's going to be a matter of secure. I think everybody's always going to want a pilot there. That's just my personal opinion. I think you can make them very secure, but I think people are always going to want that man, that person there. So
Thank you.
Or woman.
Over here, your
This
question.
is Riddle.
Right into the microphone.
sorry.
All right. Hello, I'm Alexander Laney, freshman here studying math at Embry-Riddle. You had mentioned a little bit about the mainframes and the carburetors and things being so old that people don't know about them. Isn't there some little bit of security through obscurity when you're using an old system? You know, like the airline industry is so old that the people who can program on it don't know the programming anymore, kind of thing.
Well, although I am old, and
For the dinosaurs in the audience.
yeah, so maybe I am the only one who can tune a 1971 Vega. Yeah, well, you know, or a Pinto, yeah. I've never been, I am not now, nor have I ever been a fan of security by obscurity. And particularly in the days of the internet, there's no such thing as a secret. So, I mean, if that was the gist of your question,
Yeah.
no, like I said, I'm not a fan. People also, if you're using systems that I guess are too far back, people also can't repair them. Not only do they not understand them, which, you know, just look at all that COBOL code that's still running around out there. And people my age are retiring for a reason. So I don't think that's the way to go.
Thank you.
Right over here. Step right up to the microphone, please, so we can hear you.
Hello, my name is Jacob Freeman. I'm a freshman, and my question is, since most devices have, or at least just general things around our house have computer chips in them, have a lot of connectivity, if an item doesn't have any sense of connectivity, like it doesn't have GPS, doesn't have LTE, and it doesn't have Wi-Fi, could it still be hacked?
It would have to be a physical hack then, if it doesn't have any connectivity, so they would need physical access to it. But even then, what good would that do?
I mean, I guess what you're kind of talking about is the keyboard with that circuit that could track keystrokes. So, but you're saying, yes, it could still be hacked.
Well, I mean, in that particular example, for example, yeah, the keystroke logger could still be collecting your keystrokes. If there's no network involved, then nothing presumably bad will happen because they can't send the information back, you know, back to any cosmic headquarters. But I guess the question is, could you have standalone devices that could be hacked with a physical attack if they're not networked to something else? I mean, then you just have the situation of, depending upon what the device is, I'm still able to break into the device and get whatever is information that might be valuable on the device, even though it's not networked to anything. So, for example, if I have a home computer with all of my finances on it, and my kids ever find out how poor I am, and that my life insurance is worth more than I am, that would be something I don't want them to know. So, you know, so it's still valuable information, but it's fully contained within one box. Is that sort of going to what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I mean, again, to me, it's about protecting information.
Let me follow up. Using your example, computer has never made it on the internet, but it has a wireless component in it. Somebody could hack in from the outside, even though it's not on a network. Am I correct?
Well, if the wireless is on, presumably it's on a network.
Right.
Even though it's not hooked up to a router or anything like that.
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
That could be.
Over here, your question.
Hi, I'm Darren Batista, and I'm a junior here at Embry-Riddle. My question's directed specifically to Dr. Kessler. In drone cybersecurity, there's a program called Skyjack, which is it sends out a malicious drone, and it can take control of other drones nearby it. Is there any such program that exists in relation to the maritime industry, where there's a boat that can head out and could possibly take control of wireless ships, and also exploit those and send them back to a direction, attack them?
There's nothing I know about in maritime that's that generic, because I don't think there's enough similarity in the systems that you could build a Skyjack type of device. However, your question does make me wonder, and I don't know the answer to this, about autonomous maritime vessels, and I don't know enough about how they're going to be controlled. Because I think Skyjack takes over the radio signals, doesn't it?
Wi-Fi.
It takes over the Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you've got anything controlled by Wi-Fi, I suppose I could use the same type of technology. But I haven't heard of anything like it.
Here's an odd question. Have you heard anything about technology that can actually drive fish to a different area? Like sound waves that will cause them to move away?
Hand grenades.
Yes.
Hand grenades will do it.
Yeah, there's actually some research. It's something that scuba divers wear, and it's an anti-shark device. And what it does is it emanates magnetic signals, and it's supposed to keep sharks away. Yes, I mean, that's a thing.
Really?
Yeah, but how far did that go? Because the signals don't propagate very far in the water.
I don't know.
I mean, for a shark, it doesn't matter. Keep it 1 inch away from me is fine.
It keeps the shark from actually attacking you.
Yeah.
Wow. Over here, your question for our panel.
I'm Andrew Hardy, a senior in the UAS program here. I was just curious if you guys had heard of drones being used as a platform for infiltrating other networks.
Yes. There's been some research. There's this tool called a Wi-Fi Pineapple. Are you familiar with that?
No, sir.
Okay, it's like a hardware Wi-Fi hacking tool, and it's small enough, very light enough, by the way, I ordered one, that you can actually connect to a smaller drone, and you can fly the drone over, let's say, a building, and so you wouldn't necessarily have to be, in physical contact with the building, and it could be capturing any Wi-Fi signals that were coming in around the building and actually intercepting those signals.
Thank you. That's really interesting.
Yeah, you can basically put a packet sniffer on a board, launch it onto
or Raspberry
on a
Pi or
drone
something like
Raspberry
that.
Pi,
Yeah.
It'd be, as Bell said, just put together a Raspberry Pi and
Yeah,
put together
exactly.
an app for that. And,
Which would even be smaller than
Is everybody
a
familiar with a Raspberry Pi? A Raspberry
They're
Pi is a computer. It's on a board that, that's probably about the right size.
It's a credit card size.
Yeah, it's basically a credit card size. Raspberry Pis currently come with sound output, HDMI output, 4 USB ports, an Ethernet port.
And this big?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very small.
Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. I just bought one today for a project I want to work on from Amazon for $37. And that is the computer. So now you get that, you plug it in, and you configure it. Usually you configure it with a Linux operating system. I think my 64 gig micro SD card costs almost as much as the computer itself. That's where it put the operating system. So I put my Linux operating system. I put whatever tools I want to put, and that usually leaves me about 60 gigabytes of free space to store anything I'm going to store. Throw that onto a drone. It weighs ounces.
yeah, it's not that much.
ounces,
So
easy.
pretty much any drone can carry it. You need to have some sort of power supply for it, but you can get lightweight power supplies. They weigh more than the Raspberry Pi as well. And
Raspberry Pi,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
is built by an English organization that wanted to build computers where you could build an entire computer system for less than $100.
Yeah.
And they totally succeeded.
That's what I use for my drone hacking. You can put them anywhere and connect via Wi-Fi, and then you don't even have to be anywhere near the Raspberry Pi while you're attacking something.
If you go onto the internet, it's actually pretty cool. They have little
Yeah.
projects for people that just want to learn, and that's really what it was intended, was to get people to learn. For $30, $40,
Yeah.
and a little bit of motivation, you can go in and start and build whatever you want.
Unbelievable.
And it's PI.
Yeah, PI, of course.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Right over here, your question.
My name is Luca Newton. I'm a sophomore here at Embry-Riddle. My question is mostly related to the sort of news announcement by Boeing of their new, I want to call them UCAVs, their new project for that. I was mostly wondering, and I kind of already know the answer to this is yes, because it's almost always going to be yes when it comes to is it hackable, is what's sort of the possibility and how dangerous really is it if someone was able to not only get into the actual drone's, essentially the program itself, but to essentially not even operate themselves, but cause it to go haywire and, let's say, screw around with the IFF and fire on friendlies instead. Like, how is the possibility of that? Like, is it easy to do? Is it something that those are separate?
So I have a counterpart at Boeing. Actually, that's who I was talking to before coming over here. To be honest with you, I couldn't really answer that, but I would have to say this. Knowing that the standards and the level of testing that they go through, if it's possible, it's not easy in any stretch of the imagination. And the other aspect of that is if the military is using it for the most part, they're going to have a lot of extra controls in place to do stuff. Mm-hmm. So for me, from a safety perspective, I'm not that concerned about it, quite frankly.
Thank you. Over here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Buirik Mohamed. I'm on exchange here at Embry-Riddle. My question is about the 5G technology. We all know that it is related to cybersecurity and transportation. What are some risks of this technology, and are you more positive or negative about this technology that we are about to embrace?
I'm not sure I understood the question. Did you understand?
Could I?
It's more about the 5G technology.
Yeah, so
5G
you just want to know what the risks are?
The risks, and are you more positive or negative about this technology?
Yeah, so for me, I haven't dabbled a lot with it. I know it's starting to become big with US, and they're doing some trials with it and stuff like that. What I would say is, just in general, because I don't have a lot of expertise with it, is 5G is different than 4G, so therefore it has its own unique risk, and people just need to make sure that they understand what those risks are and be able to mitigate them effectively like you do with any other technology. But I just don't have the expertise in it.
I mean, I'm not sure that 5G provides any additional cyber risk nor any additional cyber protection. I mean, it's basically, my understanding of it is basically faster and more integration of voice and data. But like I said, I'm not sure that it adds, in cyber, it's sort of cyber neutral.
Do you see him? Okay. We all know that it will be used in transportation, and it will make it faster. So maybe it will make it also vulnerable.
Again, it's technology agnostic. So here's an example. Obviously, I do a lot of work with Europe, so I can point to very specific things, and they're actually pretty advanced. You can go to the NASA equivalent, the European Space Agency, and you can actually go to one of their websites and look where they talk about how they're using and building systems that would be used using 5G for the future. So, I mean, it's there, but again, it's like any other technology. I don't know that one is more vulnerable than the other, which is what you're saying. I think it's just a matter of you have to understand what those vulnerabilities are, which you do through testing, multiple types of testing, and make sure that you follow through with that. And I think that's just a generic way of doing business across the board.
Yes. I think with 5G and 4G and all the previous G systems, the bulk of the security is built into the protocols and the applications sitting above what is essentially the wire. So if I can secure my radio transmission from somehow being spoofed, meanwhile I've got layers above it that are providing additional security as well.
Thank you.
Right over here.
And so that's actually probably one key thing that I wanted to kind of hop on here real quick. One of the biggest things that when we talk to different people is I always hear about this one thing. Oh, this makes me vulnerable. This makes me vulnerable. It's like, well, okay. The thing about cybersecurity is there's no silver bullet. There's never any one thing that's going to provide you the ultimate protection. It's all about layers and security. Right. So if I use this guy's here, I don't think he said his name, but if he did, I apologize. But you've got different layers in what you're doing. You've got your link technology, whether it's 4G, 5G, whatever the case is, and then you've got your application, whatever. You've got to put appropriate security controls in place where it makes sense to protect either your system or your data. And I think that's probably the key thing that that people tend to walk away from is like passwords, access to your system, access to different applications, different passwords for applications and stuff like that. It's just layers of protection, and sometimes it's quite annoying, including for me. But you've got to have those different layers of protection where it makes sense.
And so if I can hop onto that, I would observe, and I've sat on a number of standards committees where we've come up with data communications protocols, and in some cases even the security, although back then we weren't necessarily so concerned about it. We spend an awful lot of time trying to make sure the protocol works, and that the protocol can withstand, normal behavior, which is about 10% of the protocol, and, erroneous things that happen in a transmission system, which is the other 90% of the protocol. And there's still going to be flaws. We have a ton of people spending a lot of time testing before we deploy it, and then 15 years later, some weird thing happens. We say, oh, there's missing a semicolon out of a line of code or something. And so, as much as we try, there's going to be a flaw somewhere in a system. And so I just think it's important to, recognize that humans are building this. But with enough layers of redundancy and enough layers of protocol, hopefully, we get around that. And most systems are trying to use those multiple layers. So I just want to...
to triple hop on that, the biggest threat to any cyber system is the user, because most systems, require some kind of user input, and most of the cyber attacks that occur, the large ones like the WannaCry, ransomware attacks, things of that nature, is that you have a user who may be uneducated or may be tired or something, and they click on something that they weren't supposed to click on because they were fooled, because they thought it was one thing and it's really something else. It downloads and then it distributes itself across the network. One of the big things that we teach in all our cyber classes is that security, education, and awareness are probably the first line of defense to any good cyber hygiene system.
Over here, your question.
Hi, my name is Keanu Stevens. I'm a freshman here at Embry-Riddle, and I'm actually studying aerospace engineering. I was just curious, I'm looking more for like an opinion from you guys. I was wondering, is there anything you gentlemen can think of that shouldn't be automated for fear of vulnerability? Because we already have, our toasters are being put on Wi-Fi and on our fridges and whatnot. So I was just wondering.
Things that shouldn't be automated. Well, I don't know why we want to automate our toasters and our refrigerators, but we
automate coffee pots.
I know what they are.
Yeah.
I
want to turn on my toaster 3 minutes before I get home.
Yeah, I want to light my fire with a match.
I've got nothing on that one.
I can think of one thing, but not in mixed company.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm a technology geek, so although I may not dabble with automating everything in sight, they're certainly a cool factor to automating anything. I can't think offhand of firearms. Probably ought not to be automated.
They definitely are.
No,
isn't Google
not automatic? They shouldn't be automated.
No. They have automated ones.
So. Oh yeah, well.
Wait a minute, let me in on this. What are you talking about?
So he's talking about automated firearms, and I'm like, no, they're automated. They have stuff that's like that.
Yeah. Sorry, we came up empty on that one.
Sorry.
You said opinions, so you got several.
We've got opinions.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Scott, then the big question for our panel. Scott?
Well, my name's Scott Studner. I'm curious about, we've been talking about people taking control of things, but how hard is it to jam the signals that these autonomous things work with? And what will they do if they lose their contact with their instructions, I guess?
It's not, well, it depends on what you're talking about. The signal, you're talking about a GPS signal. There's these small devices that you can buy. They're illegal to buy. They're like $25. You can buy them on eBay. They're called, they're essentially GPS jammers. And you can buy those. They can fit in the palm of your hand. And those can work over like a 25 meter range. And there's also some things that I saw on the internet. It's a GPS jammer that truck drivers can use that fits in their cigarette lighter, because as you know, that truckers are allowed only so many hours of driving a day, and that the companies will track them according to their GPS signal. And so they take this little device, they plug it in their cigarette lighter, and all of a sudden it turns off their GPS so they can drive further. So I mean, it's very simple and cheap to do that, but on a larger scale like military, that would be something different.
Yeah, so I can tell you from an aviation perspective, when I was still working at the FAA, one of the things that came up was there was an airport that was having problems. And the truck drivers, they were using them quite frequently because
Newark?
Yeah, exactly. Because people were going by there because it was jamming things, and it wasn't intentional. It was they wanted to make sure that their corporations couldn't track them. They just happened to be going past an airport and causing a problem, and it took them quite a while to figure it out. And it turned out okay, it's actually the trucks driving by. It wasn't something on the airport. Right. But I think fundamentally, to if I understand your question correctly, to me, it's kind of like drones. People are very nervous and scared about drones because, well, you can do a lot with them. And quite frankly, you're only limited to your imagination. But it really comes down to the intended use, right? When people start using it for unintentional uses like jamming, whether it's GPS, whether it's RF signals, whether it's LTE, whatever, from a drone perspective, depending on where it is, that's part of the keeping it safe environment that they're struggling with as an industry is, worst case scenario, it loses comm, all of its comm. What is it going to do when it's done? And those are pre-programmed into certain types of drones to do things. And that's probably what should happen across the board is how do you get it to a safe state? Right. And that's what you have to think about.
There's a fail-safe for these devices if they lose their communications. It's because I was referencing, I think we just had a naval exercise either in the Baltics or the Black Sea, and the Russians were jamming some of our equipment. And it seems like the drones especially, if they were jammed and they lost their communications and they're over Pakistan, what are they supposed to do? What are they going to do?
So I can't, I can't personally speak to that. But I just know from a commercial perspective, that's one of the things that they struggle with is from an RPAS environment is, what is this going to happen in that failure scenario? And this is one of the failure scenarios is if it loses its communications, what does it do? Right. And they look at the risk of what it's going to potentially impact, small, big, or large. What is that safety state that we want to put it in and what do we want it to do? And is that been programmed into this particular object?
So our last question of the night, if you would step right to the microphone, you can ask your question.
I am Aisha Muafa, and right now I'm taking cryptography class. So I was wondering, there is no way to make the key even harder for hackers to break? I mean, I know it's just a matter of time, but there is no way to make the key changeable all the time. So by the time hackers will break this, it's already changed. Do you know what I mean?
So I think you're talking about the strength of the encryption?
Yeah, exactly.
And how often it changes or not?
Yeah.
Okay. I know they have, so for me, I know we were talking a little bit about this earlier as well. Encryption has a place. It does not always have a place, right? So when I look at things for like a drone environment and stuff like that, the command and control signal may or may not need to be encrypted, but it really comes down to how you really protect it. And it's not so much the encryption, and I get what you're talking about. If you really want to protect your information, you want to have a strong encryption for what you're doing. But to me, it's really more about the mutual authentication. Can I trust who I'm receiving commands from and who I'm getting commands to? And more importantly, the information I'm getting, can I trust that? Encryption can provide a solution to help protect it, but at the end of the day, that's not my real requirement. My real requirement is about mutual trust and being able to make sure that from an integrity perspective, the data that I'm receiving is good.
Does the MAC protocol do that? I mean, make the integrity and, I mean, if you use the MAC protocol, so are you going to know who you are talking to?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yeah. So if you use MAC protocol,
right,
are you going to know who you are talking to? I mean, can you trust this MAC address? I mean,
So this is where, so this is where
Right.
you got to take in and really understand some stuff. So for an example, I know some of the research that we're doing is I'm focused on end-to-end communications with the cockpit, and I'm very focused on how do we do that from an end-to-end perspective. And so part of that is making sure, for example, do I have a digital certificate where I know that I know the certificate is good, I can trust that certificate because of X, Y, Z. I know that when I do the key exchange, the encryption level is something that I'm willing to accept. And then I trust it, just like it's bi-directional, right? It's not just a one-way thing. And so to me, that I think is the key when we talk about data exchange. Those are what's important and how to do that. I don't know if that answers your question, but from an integrity perspective, it's those two things that I'm looking for to make sure it's solid.
Right, but one of the things I take from, and this may not be your question, but just in case, is that once two bona fide users have established their mutual authentication, how do you prevent somebody from launching a man-in-the-middle attack, throwing off one of the bona fide users, now spoofing that user, if you don't have some constant form of ensuring the authentication? And that becomes an issue then, of course, as well.
Like that VPN we were talking about.
And hence VPN.
Yeah.
Other things like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you. I want to thank, as we conclude our program tonight, exit question. They heard scary stuff. Cars, trains, boats, planes.
Yeah, drones.
The takeaway for the audience, should they be worried, or is our technology and those people who watch for us, are we keeping up with it so they don't have to go home and hide under the beds tonight?
Well, I'm a professional paranoid, so my profession tells me to be worried about this stuff. I mean, the fact is, I think about this stuff. Does it keep me up at night? No. Will I get on a train tomorrow? Much to the chagrin of my wife after watching 60 Minutes last night, yes, I would get on a train. I'm going to be getting on a plane on Saturday. I drive my car, and I get on ships whenever I can. But I am mindful of the fact that there are risks inherent with everything we do. The fact is, I think there are a number of issues in aviation cyber, but I don't see a plane crashing every day because of a cyber issue. I don't see trains crashing every day because of a cyber issue. I do think that cyber is potential existential threats to any of these industries, because if I could somehow convince everybody in the room that I could crash a plane at will using cyber methods only, nobody will ever get on a plane again. And the same is true for all modes of transportation. But like I said, I think about it because professionally that's what I'm supposed to do. It does not keep me up at night, and it doesn't stop me from traveling.
Bill, and then Jerry.
So I'll put this in perspective. So I'm a cave diver, and I have hundreds of cave dives. I used to dive by myself. I'd have 6 tanks on me. I'd be down up in North Florida, 110 feet. I'd be a mile back in a cave. That didn't scare me. What scared me was the idiots on I-95 that were texting and driving 95 miles an hour. And so it's pretty much what Gary said. You have to put everything in perspective, is that things are going to happen. One of the biggest things, one of the most horrible accidents in U.S. history was 9/11. I don't believe that had anything to do with cyber. It really had to do with human intelligence and not getting the information we needed to go through. So you need to put everything in perspective. I wouldn't be afraid of things, but I would certainly be concerned when you're purchasing something that involves technology, especially if it's something can listen in on what you're doing. You need to know a little bit more about it and put it into a risk mitigation kind of scenario, as Jerry's been talking about, and don't just go buy stuff willy-nilly.
Jerry, you get the last word.
Yeah, so my thing is hygiene. That is, it really is. It's hygiene. The awareness of what's going on and knowing what's going on in your environment is key. I mean, most people, I'm assuming most people, brush their teeth every night. They change their clothes every day, so on and so forth. You're aware of your appearance and your environment, and the way technology is changing, you need to have that same awareness. Whether it's Alexa, your laptop, whatever the case is, you need to understand your environment. More importantly, how to maintain it. And that's, I think people kind of take a lot of that part for granted is, well, I'll take care of it later. I'll do my patches and updates later. Or, it's just Alexa. It just works. I don't really, it's cool. I don't really do anything with it. But, you've got to have that awareness of your environment, like Nest. I mean, how would you like it if you get upset with your neighbor? I know he's got a nest. There's a hack on YouTube for that, and I'm gonna just keep turning up his temperature so he's like 92 degrees in his house and he's trying to sleep at night just to piss him off, right? These are the kinds of things that people, when they get bored, people get creative, and you just have to be aware of your environment, and that's my thing, is cyber hygiene to make that happen.
Welcome to the diabolical hour. I want to thank Tony and Corey for handling all of the seating for tonight. For Daryl Labello, our videographer, Tony Petro up in control, who's been producing all of our programs thus far. I want to tell you what we're going to do when we come back on March the 19th, as he says. There we go. The first moon landing, 50th anniversary, a look back. We'll have a panel of speakers who are working directly or indirectly on the project that are local. They'll be here. And we're inviting everybody to come in with their memories of the first landing on the moon and their questions for our panel. That is March 19th, right here in the Lemron Auditorium. Once again, I want to give a thanks and a round of applause for our guests, Dr. Philip Krager, Dr. Gary Kessler, and Jerry Hancock. I was going to give you a doctorate title. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Have a very pleasant evening.